me. My name is Dr. Tom Rabb. I'm the superintendent of schools here. And in the wake of the horrific events of Uvalde, we thought it would be important to get together and talk a little bit about safety and security here in Stoughton. Stoughton was an early adopter for the ALICE program that you're going to hear about in the wake of Sandy Hook back in 2012. Stoughton really jumped on the bandwagon early and was able to do a lot of training with the staff early on. And I know from some experience in some other schools, Stoughton really jumped on the bandwagon early. So we've been doing a lot of work with safety in the schools. And the presentation that you're going to see tonight was actually originally given back in 2018, and even before then, the teachers were being trained on this. So I want you to know that we've been taking safety and security in the schools for quite a long time here in Stoughton. We're joined here by the Chief of Police, Chief McNamara, our Deputy Chief Holmes, and SRO Lindsay Bonda, who's been able to join us. Thank you. Instrumental in keeping us going and making sure that we're safe in the schools. And I wanted to take a few minutes just to talk a little bit about safety and security. Mr. Gulia, the principal here at the Gibbons, he's also our district security liaison. He'll talk a little bit about the ALICE program. He'll talk a little bit about the safety protocols that we use here. And then, honestly, I just want to open it up to questions. Any questions that people have, if I can answer the question, if Mr. Gulia can answer the question, we have members of the administrative team here. If it's a question specific to the high school, we have Ms. Miller here, the principal of the high school. If it's a question specific to the middle school, unfortunately, we don't have a representative from the middle school here tonight, but Mr. Gulia was an assistant principal there for many, many years, and I'm told he can answer any question about the middle school. And we have the elementary school principals with us as well. So if there's any questions at all, feel free to ask them, and then we'll direct the question to the appropriate person in the room, so we make sure that everybody has their questions answered. So at this time, let me turn it over to Mr. Gulia to talk a little bit about safety and security, what we're doing now, and what we're planning for the future, and then we can open it up to questions. Mr. Gulia.
Thank you, Dr. Rabb. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. We know it's a busy time of the year. We appreciate you being here. First, I want to thank my colleagues and our friends from Stoughton Police Department for being here as well. A lot of experience here in the crowd with school safety, keeping our kids safe. From my perspective, I have 3 kids that attend Stoughton Public Schools, high school, middle school, and elementary, so it's something that's very personal for me, along with many of the people here, school administrators. We've got some people in the crowd that are part of our district crisis team, so it's a very personal thing, keeping kids safe. So, an agenda for the evening. I'm pretty concise, so I believe that everyone's time is valuable, but we will pause for questions and answers. We're going to give you a brief history of school safety in Stoughton, talk about threat assessment, some building security features, ALICE protocols, and then of course time for Q&A. First, I want to start off with our guiding philosophy for school safety here in Stoughton. And this is heavy when you think about it. The first one, we trust our staff to make life-saving decisions. This is something that we are constantly telling our staff, is that we trust you to make a life-saving decision. Doing something is better than doing nothing. Training and building confidence among staff members helps keep our buildings safe. But the biggest thing that we try to build is a mindset in people, confidence within people, trust that if you've got to make a decision, you're going to be supported. So that's our guiding philosophy. It's really a common sense approach to school safety grounded in research. All of the research and after action reports that come out, whether it was after Sandy Hook or after Uvalde, they will be hundreds of pages of reports and recommendations for schools, for law enforcement. We read through those reports, but something very consistent, especially since Sandy Hook, is the importance of threat assessment. Now, I'm not going to get into our threat assessment process in detail, but it all comes back to trying to assess those threats in the schools, in the community, and then having a plan of action. The threat assessment model in Stoughton is based off of the University of Virginia, which did a lot of work with the Department of Homeland Security and the FBI to come up with their protocol that's constantly evolving. It's really the importance of If somebody sees or hears something, whether people are talking about it, whether it's online, that they come forward to administration, they come forward to a school resource officer, they get that information to us. Let's talk a little bit about the day-to-day building safety. All of our buildings have locked doors, one entry point. All of our buildings have security cameras. There are lots of resources within the schools to help keep classroom teachers safe. Visitors to the building have to go through a process where they have to check in and they're closely monitored. We have building-based and district crisis teams in place that meet regularly. We have a very strong relationship with the Stoughton Police Department, Stoughton Public Schools. Our district crisis team often works closely with our law enforcement friends on many, many different items. So there are a lot of things that go into keeping kids safe. We're going to go through the training that we give to our teachers and staff. It's Alice. I'm sure that you've heard of it. There are a lot of you that are connected to the school security world just looking around the crowd. But Alice was developed many years ago. How did it come to Stoughton? Well, we were at a conference. I was at a conference with some of our SROs at the time, and the founder of Alice spoke. This was back in 2010, 2011. And he said, I think his name is Greg Crane, his last name is Crane. He was from Texas, he had Southern drawl. His wife was a principal, elementary school principal, and he was a SWAT officer for Dallas PD. And he would talk to his wife about, why do you do fire drills, but you're not thinking about other threats to the school? And he would have these conversations with his wife. And he came up with this protocol, Alice, which Stoughton was an early adopter, which has since been adopted by tens of thousands of school districts around the country. Another program out there, Department of Homeland Security, Run, Hide, Fight, same philosophy. So Alice, let's see. Before we get into what each letter of Alice means, this confusion comes up all of the time. Shelter in place versus lockdown. And we wanted to explain to you, this is the same thing we explain to our staff, but when we go into a shelter in place, and we've had multiple buildings this year go into shelter in places, those are for a lower level type of situation in a building. For example, a medical emergency. Someone breaks their arm at recess, and you want to make sure the hallways are clear, so you go into shelter in place. That's happened a few times in Stoughton. Lockdown, that's the most serious of situations. If a building goes into lockdown, it means that teachers stop their teaching, locking their doors, covering their windows, moving kids away from the doors and windows, getting ready to react. So then Alice, it gets into how we respond. So each letter stands for a different term. We've got alert, lockdown, inform, counter, and evacuate. Of course, emergencies don't happen in a linear way, so this is just a way to help us with training. Alert. The alert could come in many different ways. The alert could come with a message on the PA. It often doesn't happen like that. An alert could come by a sound. An alert could come with an observation a staff member makes about someone. We tell people this information can come from all sorts of different points. Teachers, like many of us, they like to have a plan. If this happens, then I do this. But unfortunately, certainly in my experience, school emergencies happen at the worst possible time. When I was an assistant principal at the middle school, everything happened when the principal was gone. Everything. I mean, he would be gone at a meeting, something would happen. I could almost count on it, So you never quite know when it's going to happen. You have to be prepared. You could walk in. I'm an early morning person. Sometimes I'm here 7:15 in the morning. Could have a situation going on that early or after hours. So that's alert. Making sure that teachers are aware of their surroundings, understanding the situation. All right, lockdown, we talked about this. It's a good starting point to get immediate control. Locked doors, again from those studies that I talked about, a locked door is a very significant barrier. They provide time. Locks can be defeated, but it takes some time to defeat those locks. Barricade. We teach teachers how to barricade their rooms. There are many ways that you can barricade a classroom. We're not in a classroom right now, and this is a bigger space. So you can see if I'm thinking about if we had to go into lockdown here at the Gibbons, I'm already thinking about how do I make sure all these doorways are locked, right? And then reacting. But teachers often in their rooms have got tables, they've got desks, they can quickly barricade a classroom. Barricading is a great strategy. Ready for the next one. Information, same thing as alert. Information we want to be fluid, in real time, no code words. People have heard this presentation before, so excuse my humor for a moment. In California, they had a code word for if there was a school emergency. It was, there's a bear in the swimming pool. So they told everyone that. If there's a school emergency, on the PA you're gonna hear, there's a bear in the swimming pool. Well, in California, they've got a lot of bears. One day there was a bear in the swimming pool, okay? So the principal's saying there's a bear in the swimming pool. Law enforcement knows what that means, right? No, really, there's a bear in the swimming pool. The problem with code words is not everyone knows what you're talking about. So it's real language, it's in real time, and it's to the people that need it. Who needs it? Law enforcement needs it. The people in the school need it. Counter. So this is really that moment that it's you or you're standing between something bad happening and your students, and you've got no other choices. You've locked down, you've barricaded. This is the one where you've got to do what you've got to do. And countering means making yourself a difficult target, classrooms have got all sorts of things that can be used to do some damage, unfortunately. And this is the one that's hardest to think about, and this is like a last resort, the counter strategy. But all of that research, again, coming back to that research and data, whether it was at Virginia Tech or other mass casualty events, the people that did something to protect themselves were in a much better position than people that just froze. We want to try to eliminate that freezing part, doing something. And then the last one, evacuate, is a great strategy, getting away from a threat. You know, if the threat is over in the playground 100 yards from now and you can get away from it, and you can get into a room and barricade, or you can get further away from that threat, absolutely. We encourage people to think about evacuating and knowing their evacuation routes. So that's what ALICE stands for. There are many, many different school safety resources out there. ALICE has got a very informative website. Department of Homeland Security has done a lot of work around school safety. And then Stoughton Public Schools, we have a website that's linked. We've done training exercises with the Stoughton Police Department. There's videos on there. There's videos of other nights that we've had. So those are all there. We will make sure that you all have this PowerPoint presentation. We'll post it to our website. So when we think about this topic as parents, it's just a very, very unsettling thing to think about. How do you talk to your kids? We also have resources on our school safety page about how to talk to students. So how do I talk to my kids about school safety? Because it's something that's on my mind. I hear them coming home from school and talking. I have honest conversations with them depending on how old they are. I also try not to answer a question that hasn't been asked. For me, I was curious to see what sort of questions my middle schooler and high schooler would have about Uvalde. My third grader, I was curious to know how long it would take her to ask some questions, which she did. So you have to really, it's different for every child and it's different for every family. And there's help for those conversations. You can always, if your child asks you a question that you're not ready to answer, the school can be a good resource. Parents will call here and they'll say, hey, Mr. Goulia, you know, my child had this question, didn't feel like I was ready to answer it in that moment. Do you have some help? Do you have some advice? Sure, we've got some advice, we can help you with that. You know, we're going to be doing, I think that many of you received emails from your school principals about lockdown drills that are going to occur between now and the end of the year. Our teachers will talk to our students. We'll talk to our students. We'll reassure them that they're safe. But there's a lot that goes into those conversations, and we can help you out with those. So that's the formal presentation that I have. I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Rapp.
Because he sees me walking toward him, and as a good principal, he's like, oh, I've got to give him the mic. So I just wanted to mention one or two things before we open it up to questions and answers. And I know I'm driving the videographer crazy, but that's all right. You're going to have to follow me. So when you see this for the first time, I'm just curious in the room, how many people have heard of the ALICE training before? Is this the first? Okay, fantastic. That makes me feel good. It's a little scary when you hear a little bit about it, and we certainly, many of us know alert, lockdown, inform. But when you get to counter and evade, that's the beginning of the game changer. And what came out of the University of Virginia studies was these are always frightening events. These are always unpredictable events. If anything happens, the people in the University of Virginia studies, those who evacuated, those who were able to make a decision, the shooter is down too far away and I can get out the side door, those are the people that had a better chance of surviving. And that's very hard to say because you're talking about chances in a very, very sensitive situation. But those are the kinds of decisions that we are challenging our staff with, and we're asking them to make those decisions. And that's the biggest difference between if you've been around a while and you know the events of Columbine or you know the events even of Sandy Hook. When we came out of that in 2012 and later on with the University of Virginia, we learned that we had to do things differently. And so the traditional lockdown, which we are going to practice and is critically important, the next step to that is taking it, and next year we're going to do a little bit more in terms of educating people and keeping moving and getting back into the ALICE training. So I just wanted to mention that because it's scary if you've never heard it before and you've never heard that we're giving our teachers that empowerment, but it's critical to the safety of our students, and they need to be able to have that freedom. So I'd like to open it up to questions. Maybe I'll let Mr. Goulia MC the questions, and then and we can decide who's best to answer them. We have the chief, we have myself, Mr. Ford, I believe, is here, deputy superintendent. Is he? No, he's outside. Okay, he's been around a while, so if he has a question, he can do it too.
Yeah. So are you okay if I give you the mic with the question, and then we'll figure out who the best person is to answer?
I was just wondering, on the slide it said don't use your car to leave. Could you expand on that, please?
Yeah.
Thank you.
So that's part of our staff training right there. And we didn't want staff members, you know, leaving, taking kids in their car, just bolting campus. So that was in there. That's part of our staff training.
Okay, great, thank you.
Absolutely. Mr. Straw?
First one, and I know I've talked to you about it, but when was or every school, class, or student been trained this year?
All the teachers received training at the end of September of 2021. So they received an extensive, much more extensive than this PowerPoint on ALICE training. And with COVID, a lot of the student training was paused. So one of the things that we're really trying to get back to now is doing the lockdown drills at the end of this year, and then we'll really get back into it in September, October, and November.
So then another question I have would be, with staff, I'm sure there's like, when you do your training or whatnot, there's a record of it, or they did it, and yada yada. Is there a checklist for students on different trainings with the analysts, bullying, fire drills, and even online security? Is there a checklist? And then if there is, who's in charge of that to make sure that the students get it done?
The checklist is more on the part of the staff, so we're responsible for providing the training and making sure that it goes forward. So it's not so much where the students sign off. They sign off that they've received their handbooks, and so the information that's in the handbooks is there, but it's really making sure that we provide that.
And my last one, sorry. On the slide, I didn't see anything, but I was wondering if there's any training for public schools, administration, the teachers, or even the police for any special ed or anybody with disabilities due to the ALICE program and what the protocols kind of, and that's not just at, like, say, the Jones, but every school. What do you guys have in place for that?
So I'm certain that there is a sensitivity towards special education students. As a matter of fact, I had a meeting with the principals this morning, and one of the things that we talked about was, now that we're doing these lockdown trainings, it's the end of the school year, they were already thinking about students in their buildings who might be particularly sensitive to a training like this, and we're going to be alerting the staff and talking to the staff. So the special education teachers are already sensitive, and they know who those students are that need a little extra care or would need a bit of a warning or an understanding, and so we're already putting those things into place.
Yeah, I know with that, with the disabilities, is in, like, say, I know my daughter's worried about, a couple of her students at her school with physical disabilities also. Has that been brought up to put in place with the teachers, and not just the teachers that have the student, but the whole entire school, just in case the student happened to be down here or wherever or whatnot?
Mr. Gullia, can I put you on the spot, because I know you have a student here and a chat.
Sorry.
Absolutely. Yeah, so Mr. Struck brings up a very good point about students with disabilities. I've got students here that are in wheelchairs. Oftentimes students can have something going on, so we are absolutely aware of that. And one thing our friends from Stoughton Police Department often remind us is we don't want to traumatize through training. So you don't want to create a training exercise that you traumatize kids, whether it's special education students or any one of your student body. It's hard to find that balance, especially right now. So that's really our guiding philosophy.
And those students have emergency evacuation plans. Those students have
That's why I brought the whole team. See?
evacuation plans. I'm Danielle Gallen. I'm the director, supervisor of health services. That's all I have. I'm done.
Can you talk a little more about the resource officers? Like, does every school have a dedicated one? Is there like one for the district? Can you just, what is their role?
Absolutely. I'm going to hand this over to Chief McNamara. I think that people get tired of hearing my voice, so I'm going to turn over to Chief McNamara.
Hello everyone, Chief McNamara. Today we have one of our SROs here. We have two dedicated SROs. They are mainly out of the high school and middle school, and whenever there is an incident or anything that needs their attention at any of the elementary schools or in the Jones School, they can pull themselves away from that school depending on what they have going on. But I'll let Officer Bond talk a little bit about her job and what she does every day.
Thank you, Chief. So I'm primarily based out of the middle school, but that just means that I try and spend most of my free time at the middle school. A lot of what is helpful for us as school resource officers is building those relationships with the kids. And they tend to start to get into trouble when they get to middle school and high school, which is why we focus on that. This year has been a very busy year for us, so unfortunately we've neglected the elementary schools a little bit in that regard. We like to go to the schools just to say hello, not just when something bad is happening. And we have a really good relationship with all the principals, so they allow us to do that as well. But we do well-being checks on kids that the staff are worried about. If there was an incident over the weekend or after school hours, we'll share that with the staff. Because so Dave talked about the threat assessments. Part of that is information sharing. So we have a good relationship with the schools to share information both ways. If we don't know what's going on in the schools and they don't know what the kids are doing outside of school, we can't know fully what's going on in the town.
So I also brought up one very important point, is that we as uniformed officers don't want to just be in the schools when something bad is happening. So we've tried to have a lot of issues, a lot of times incidents, school fairs to engage with the students so that they see the uniform as not a scary thing, but so the kids know that they can come up and speak to us and interact with us. Just did a little while ago at the girls softball game at the high school. A couple kids came up. You know, that stuff is very important so that there is that fear factor. As a patrol officer, one of the worst things that can happen is that, you know, that kindergarten, they learn how to dial 911 in the old landlines, showing my age a little bit. But when they would dial 911 at the beginning of the school year, and the officer would go there and mom or dad would say, "You're in trouble now, the officers are here." That would give us a bad perception from the kids. They would think that, you know, I'm not going to tell the officers what's going on, I don't want to talk to the officers. And so certainly that's an opportunity for us to break that barrier down and sort of have that partnership and begin to teach that young child, hey, we're not scary monsters in the uniforms, we're there to help them. And so we try to do that in every opportunity we can with the schools. You know, we go in uniform and we read books to the kids so that they're not just seeing us lockdown drills or Alice drills, they're actually seeing us interact on good occasions. So that's one of the better partnerships that we have, and we do a lot of great partnerships with the school system.
I'm asking this one on elementary school level. What happens if a child is in the restroom when the lockdown comes in?
Yeah, so it gets back to the statement I made about things happening at the worst time. So lockdowns can't be planned. A drill can be planned, but a lockdown situation can't be planned. So yes, it could be when a lot of kids are in the hallway passing or kids in the bathroom. So what you do is you work with the teachers whose classrooms are close to the bathroom, and you have them go in there and quickly take a look and pull those kids into the classroom. As principals, school administrators, it's on your mental checklist of when your building goes into lockdown. You know, like, I've got to make sure those bathrooms are accounted for. I've got to make sure that kids are out of the hallway. You know, I remember one story. I was at a school, we were doing a drill, and a teacher, first year, nurse, we're doing a lockdown drill. Her kids were out getting milk. Okay, student teacher wasn't quite sure how to respond to that. It's a training portion. The student teacher went out to try to find those students. The students had already been pulled in. But there is a lot that we have to think of, whether it's students in the bathroom, students in the hallway, a student who's having a difficult time. We train our staff to pull those students into the closest classroom or office area.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Hi. Thank you for holding this, by the way. If I can make a suggestion, it might be helpful for parents to do this a couple or maybe in a few different times in a year. Because I know these questions come up not just in the wake of an incident, but just the beginning of the year, you know, various times of the year. We have one daughter at Gibbons. We have another daughter coming into Gibbons in the fall. I'm also a nurse in the community, so I appreciate this very much. One question I have, I know we talk a lot about the staff and the teacher training, but is there any communication with the children? What are the children, you know, is there any kind of preparation? Is there any kind of debriefing after a drill? Or, you know, any kind of communication about what does this mean? What does this look like for them?
Absolutely. Can everybody hear me? I can project my voice pretty well. So if we, before and after, and I'll let any one of the principals jump in if you want to, but I think the teachers will talk to the students at an age-appropriate level. So at the elementary level, it's more about where in the classroom do we go in the event of a lockdown. So they're going to teach the students even before a drill happens. If we have a lockdown, this is the corner of the room that's furthest away from the windows, that's furthest away from the doors, and they will teach that. The older the students get, the more information they can handle, and the more information we will give them. And I think that's one of the things that we want to try to move into next year is, as the students are older, middle school, high school, being able to help them have more information. But absolutely, not only before the drill have we already had those conversations, but afterwards, the teachers will talk to them and explain, okay, what happened, how did you feel, what did you do? And any of the elementary principals want to jump in, feel free, but I think it's pretty standard.
And just a follow-up question to that, do you use the terminology lockdown with the children? Like, do they, I mean, elementary might be a little young to go into details, of course, about what a lockdown can consist of, but, you know, as parents at home trying to reinforce, you know, you want the message to be consistent because you don't want them to be confused in the moment. You know, my teacher said to do this, but my mom said to do this, so what do I actually do, you know, in that real-time moment?
I'm pretty confident we pretty universally use the word lockdown. We do make a distinction between a shelter in place and a lockdown. Like we said earlier, I think that's important because a lot of the students will hear, you know, we had a lockdown today. Well, no, we had an ambulance at the school went into shelter in place 15 to 20 minutes so that they could deal with that situation. So we try to separate those two terms, but we've been very consistent with those two terms with the students so they begin to understand them. Like anything else, you define it differently at different ages. So how you're going to talk about a lockdown to a kindergarten or first grade is different than how you're going to talk at high school.
Dr. App, if I could just jump in on that point. The way that we talk to kids, particularly at the elementary level, is this is what we do to keep our schools safe. We do fire drills to keep our schools safe. We do school safety drills to keep our schools safe. But yeah, the terminology lockdown, you know, like if we were doing a lockdown drill right now, you would hear lockdown, lockdown, this is a drill, this is a drill, lockdown, lockdown. We are careful with our language, but at the same time, you know, we want to be honest about what we're preparing for, and we're preparing to keep kids safe. We're thinking about active shooter, but there are all sorts of other situations that we have to plan for. The nice thing about the ALICE model is it builds that mindset.
You just gave me the perfect segue. So, perfect segue to that question, with the answer, is there's a lot of incidents at schools, a lot of student-related, a lot of things that are uncontrolled, fights, in or out. I know there was an incident a couple of weeks ago with some off-campus coming on campus at the high school that we got alerted about. And also, so question A is going to be how to handle something like that, where it's not a full-blown, but still an issue. And then second, to a lesser degree, but equally as important, as we learned down in Texas, is students go in and out of doors all the time. You know, they go out for various different reasons, good, bad, or indifferent. Are there monitors in place, whether technology-based or personnel-based, to keep an eye on all the doors outside of the main entrances?
I can take that.
Okay. I'll answer and then I'll add something.
It's a really good point. How many doors are here at the Gibbons? At least 20. We've got cameras on the doors. Our teachers are vigilant about the doors. But like you said, kids, we know how kids can be. They run out to grab something they left on the playground. The door gets open a little bit. So what we really talk about is making sure those doors are secured, locked. But we constantly hear that because there are different doorways in a school. And, you know, we live in a free society. You know, there's movement. And we try to control that as much as we can, and it's something we really emphasize, that if a door is not working properly, if it's not locked or shut, make sure you do that ASAP.
Thank you, and let us know. I think one of the first things I did, that we all did after Uvalde, is we reminded ourselves to make sure all exterior doors are closed all the time. And we're always doing that. As principals, as administrators, we're always reminding ourselves to make sure that exterior doors are closed and locked and pushed shut. The other thing that we're doing as part of our lockdown drills over the next couple of weeks is we've asked maintenance and technology to also be involved. And so they'll be watching and making sure that everything is working, everything is happening. So we're really doing a thorough assessment. Though it's the end of the year, we're doing a thorough assessment. So if anything does need to be addressed, we can absolutely address it immediately. Sure, and then we'll get to...
So I have a question about the doors as well, kind of in the classroom, touch base on his. The school, inside the school, if there's a true emergency lockdown in the classroom doors, do they automatically lock, or is that something the teachers have to go and lock? What about the glass through the classroom, you know, the doors, the glass on the doors?
I can answer, but one of the principals might do better than I can. It really depends on the school. So
Okay.
the teachers know the school. Some of the schools, it's a push button and the door locks.
Okay.
You know, the teacher's expected to know how to lock their door, and it is different from one school to the next, but it is an expectation that they know how to lock the door. Part of the lockdown scenario also does involve, I believe, covering the glass so that people know how to cover the glass as well.
There's no special glass that prevents anybody from just breaking it with a hard object or anything like that?
Again, I would venture to say, and George Smith will help me out, yeah, I know the newer schools would have, would break easily.
Thanks. I'm Joyce Husseini, Director of Maintenance and Operations. No, if you're talking about classroom doors, on the older schools, there's actually wire embedded in some of the glass, which is now against fire code, but it still exists in some of the buildings. But for the most part, they're very narrow. Most of our lights are just a couple inches wide. They're a deterrent, but they wouldn't necessarily stop from being broken.
Hi there, Julie Miller, Principal Stoughton. I want to go back to one of your questions as well, sir. But at the high school, all of our doors are locked inside the building at all times, all classroom doors. Teachers have magnets that they can slide in front of the latch so that, you know, they don't have to keep getting up if a kid needs to go to the bathroom or whatnot. But then just it's a moment to slide that magnet off. So at the high school, a little different. All of our glass in the building is also resistant. So with the newer school, obviously we are blessed with those features. Just went back to your question about what do you do in the moment when there's like a fight on campus, which is a little bit different. Yep. So in those situations, principals, administration are assessing that as we are dealing with that situation. Our primary concern is to make sure that students are safe in those moments. So if there is a fight, we're trying to break up those kids. Meanwhile, other administrators, other teachers in the area are trying to remove students that are not involved, peripheral sort of onlookers, because they can also become endangered as well. But in those instances, if there were to be something that happens in that time which causes more concern for general welfare of other people, we instantly can go into lockdown if that were the need. So it really depends on the situation and what we approach and what is happening in those moments and their momentary decisions.
Does lockdown also happen during after-school activities? Or is it different when they're out on the track, or obviously it's different?
It absolutely does. So a couple of years ago, before we moved into the new building, we had a situation that was happening off of school grounds, I believe, at like Immaculate Conception. But we had students on the fields at that time at the high school. We're open like 24 hours a day. So we had kids on the field, and we got the lockdown call. So we immediately mobilized, pulled our kids into the gym so that we could make sure that kids were safe at all times. So we absolutely have those protocols in place as well.
Yeah.
So something to add to that, if there's something going on outside of the school that we're concerned with, this actually happened on a voting day here at the Gibbons. There was something going on at a residence over on the other side of Plain Street, but because of what the incident was, we asked Dave to go into lockdown. So it could be for something in the community as well. And then if you know how the Wilkins, the middle school, and the high school are set up, if the high school goes into a lockdown, the middle school will be notified as well as the Wilkins, and they'll make a decision about whether to go into just a shelter in place, or depending on the situation, they may also go into lockdown because of the proximity of the schools.
There was a question in the back. I'll get first and then I'll check.
Hi, good evening. So my question, the Alex is great. I love the model. My question is more geared towards the middle school and high school. So it seems from what I'm understanding from the presentation is we're trying to protect people from getting into the building, where now everything's becoming more accessible to younger people, such as drugs, guns, knives, kids younger and younger, learning every day. Is there any protocol in place to detect for it? I know you can't just search a kid for any reason, but if something were to happen, you know, would there be metal detectors ever put in, anything like that?
It all goes down to the threat assessment that we were talking about earlier. I think what I do know is to search anything, a principal needs reasonable suspicion. So they do need to have it for a reason. It can't just be, you know, for no reason. But I'll tell you that because we've had such a heightened awareness over the last several years, my experience, not only here in Stoughton, but in prior districts, has been the kids will come to us. They alert very quickly. And so if a student is concerned about their friend, whether it's because they're concerned because the friend might have something on them, or the student is just not doing well, they will find an adult. And more often than not, it's not like years ago where the kids would kind of hide it. We find that they come to us very, very quickly. And they'll let us know what's going on. But a lot of it is also about building relationships with students, building relationships with the kids, making sure we know who's around, what their family situation is like, and so forth. So we work on that all the time. But it's part of the threat assessment piece that we work on.
I was following up on the question that was asked earlier about being consistent with messages at home. I have kindergarten and third grade. This is more about my third grader, of just understanding what the specific types of examples that you're telling them we're trying to be safe about in the lockdown drills, just so that I could give her an example of something that might happen that may not be the full extent, just so I'm being consistent. I was curious.
Can I let one of my elementary colleagues answer that? I'm pretty confident I can. Katie, might you?
Hi, Katie Monahan, principal of the Wilkins. So I think one of the things that we really try to be very careful about is making sure that all of our discussions are developmentally appropriate for the students that we're working with. And like Mr. Goulia had said just a little while ago, our focus is more on just telling the students that we're doing everything we can to keep them and the school safe. And we don't necessarily get into specifics like we're trying to protect them from an active shooter. I think that depends entirely on the students that we're working with, and that might be appropriate for maybe our 4th or 5th graders, but I think we really try to be more generic. One of the things that I would recommend for parents in terms of supporting us at home and delivering an appropriate message is to remind the students that when they're at school practicing any kind of drill, to make sure that they're always listening to the adults that they're with, and that is the best way for themselves the best way for them to keep themselves and their friends safe.
Are there any other examples besides, not necessarily being an active shooter, but just another example of things that might be used just as something where you might need to be kept safe, or you kind of...
Sure. We talked about anything outside. So sometimes there are incidents in the community that don't necessarily have to do with school, but might be adjacent to the school. And so the school will go into lockdown to move kids away from the windows, perhaps. You know, and so we'll have the kids. So that's why, you know, earlier we said, well, we'll tell the kids where to go in the classroom, but that can change based on the situation. And one of the things that we train the teachers on is just that kind of fluid thinking, because we want them to have the freedom to say, okay, well, you know, I told the kids last week that we were going to lock down in this part of the classroom, but if for any number of reasons that's not the right decision in that moment, they have the freedom to move them somewhere else. We'll go over here and then I'll get back to you.
Just my quick question. Mrs. Monahan is great. So my son's a first grader at the Wilkins, and like there's a shelter in place, we get the notification, so I can kind of follow with it. Will we know like after lockdown's been done?
Absolutely.
Okay, because he doesn't tell us, so if he comes home or something.
That doesn't change, by the way.
I have a 20-year-old and a 7-year-old, yeah. But just in case he does come home with questions or something, I'll know like, okay, he's asking because he had the lockdown. Thank you.
I promise I know this.
I have a question on behalf of a friend whose son is at the South School, and she asked about the adjoining doors between rooms that don't lock.
So Mr. Doris here, I'll ask him, but I can answer that in general because that's true for almost every school that we're joining doors. It's really the responsibility of the teachers to make sure that both doors, the exterior doors to the hallways are locked. So if the interior door can't lock, as long as the exterior doors to the hallways are locked. And the teachers know that if they have a room with an interior door.
So if there's like, as the doorways connect, if someone happened to not be in one of those classrooms, that door would be locked anyway. So the classrooms are locked during the day. So even though there is access between room to room, that's those adjoining doorways, all the doorways that go into the hallway that you have access to are locked during the day.
That's a really good question, the adjoining doors between classrooms. So, as many questions as you have and things on your mind, you can imagine what teachers are thinking about. So, in classrooms where there's adjoining doors, you know, something that we've trained on is if we go into lockdown, potentially bringing students into that one corner room, okay? Less doors that you're barricading, more adults in that room that can move furniture. So teachers are absolutely aware of those adjoining doors. If you've been to Stoughton High School at all, into any of the classrooms, they don't have any adjoining doors. It's how they build schools now these days. The other piece I wanted to talk about was the communication piece. I was reminded of this at the middle school many years ago when we went to shelter in place, and students text pretty quickly, right? So they text their families, and we had gone to shelter in place, and within 5 or 10 minutes, we probably had 25 parents that were there. And I was like, wow, information really travels quickly. So after a lockdown drill, we know to send a message quickly out to the parents and community. We know that you're watching your phones. We know that a lot of kids are coming to school with phones. And we know that information can get out there pretty quickly. So it's very much on our mind, that communication piece.
Another question here, and then I'll get back to
So along the lines of kids don't really tell you anything, I guess I'm just wondering if you could
That's
kind
another
of...
conversation.
Yeah, right. Like what they experience during a lockdown drill, like are they just like sit put, like do they ever do barricades, just like what the kids experience during the drills?
So far,
So for the most part, what we practice with the students is, again, to listen to the teachers, the grown-ups in the room, and we have the students go to a place that the teachers already talked about, and they sit quietly together, usually in a lockdown drill. Again, for the older kids and then some of the, the middle school and the high school, that will look very different. But at the elementary level, it's usually, believe it or not, a very calm experience. Because
My daughter's actually in the middle school.
Okay. So maybe Mr. Goulet could probably answer better for the middle school. But at the elementary level, the kids, we try our best to keep the kids as calm as possible. And then there's a discussion prior and after as well.
I spent 17 years in that middle school as a math teacher and assistant principal. I know that building pretty well, and I know how those middle school kids can be. I've got a middle schooler at home. So a lockdown drill, you go into a lockdown drill, lockdown, this is a drill, lockdown. So what's going to happen? Well, school administrators will be walking around with school resource officer, Stoughton police officer. The drill itself takes about 2 or 3 minutes. It's designed to be that length of time because we really don't want to keep kids in lockdown too long during a drill. But during that drill, the most important thing, absolutely, students reacting and listening to their teacher, 100%. But the big thing is that we're walking around the school, we're checking doors, we're checking to make sure those security features are working, we're checking to make sure those cameras are working, and we're walking around the school with like a checklist going through it. So typical student experience is they're listening to their teacher's directing them. Now middle school kids, some of them are taller than me. And if you need some help moving something, this is what I would talk to our kids about. I may need some help moving some furniture real quick. So the middle, absolutely, the bigger the kids are, the more they can handle. But the biggest thing is the teacher's got to get control of that room immediately and then go from there.
So one other thing to keep in mind too is myself, Mr. Gulia, we're gonna go around to the classrooms once it's all over, and we're gonna check in to make sure there aren't any classrooms where there's students that are having a really hard time. Or say we were walking around and we noticed a room was particularly loud. We're gonna go in and have a conversation about why that's not appropriate. So we don't just say we're having a lockdown drill and we walk out the door 2 minutes later. We spend a lot of time after the fact going around to make sure the kids, the teachers, everyone is okay after it, and have those conversations if we need to.
And at the high school, since we obviously have the biggest and oldest children, we do barricade. Our kids do help barricade. They do help secure the space, and because they're at the maturity level where they can handle it. And many times our teachers have already talked to the kids about what will we do in this classroom if there's a lockdown during our class. And they've walked through plans. They have placed things on the side of the sidelight where the glass is that they can block that easily. They've talked to kids about what's in the room that they can grab. So at that level, we're doing much more. We have done those drills where they've actually barricaded and evacuated.
Talk about the design, some of the things that we did purposely.
At the high school. So when we were building the high school, we did take a lot of purpose and intention in building the high school for security reasons. So there's a lot of features within the building to build in security. For example, we already talked about this, some resistant glass. All the doors are locked in the building at all times. We have a special vestibule where you have to be buzzed in twice before you can actually get into the building. We have in the classrooms themselves, there's linoleum laid down, and it's pretty and it's lovely and there's multiple colors, but there's actually a point to that. The way it's designed is to be a visual reminder to teachers of where they can stand to be out of sight from the glass. And we have a Go to Blue system, which is an alert notification system that all of the teachers and administrators have access to immediately, which goes directly to the police station instantly. And it opens up a text box on all of the teachers' computers that allow them to be able to communicate back and forth with the police department, as well as share information within the building about what they're seeing and what they're hearing. It's a wonderful life-saving tool that we have available to us. We practice those often as well. We have not done those this year, although we did have a Go to Blue alarm this year with our kids. And it has a lot of other bells and whistles that go along with it too that help notify the people in the building and do some other significant things within the building to keep the building safe. Did I miss anything?
I think
That's pretty good.
There was a question.
So we're the parents of a kindergarten at a local school, and I just see a common theme, a lot of parents of younger kids here, they're worried about what would happen, looking for examples. I just want to say it's hard to find an example, but it's important to talk to them in an age-appropriate way. Back in January, we were at the mall with our daughter, there was a shooting, it's nothing that you can prepare for. That happened on a Saturday afternoon. Saturday night, I sent an email to her principal and her teacher, Miss Monahan, and they were great. They were back in touch with us Sunday morning on a weekend when they didn't even have to be checking their emails, so they've been a great resource. I know it's a hard subject, but it does really happen anywhere at all times. It's nothing you can really plan to happen, but it's stuff that you need to prepare for.
Thank you. I'm going to get this gentleman on.
Thank you. This isn't a political question. This isn't debate issues. This is just a general question to the community. I know Stoughton police go above and beyond, and I'm very thankful, and one of the biggest pluses living in Stoughton. I've called you guys several times. You guys respond within like a minute and a half. It's been crazy. The 2 times I called over 20 years. So wonderful. But the question really is around not so much about the schools. We all talk about containment within the schools, but the community at large. There are a lot of legal firearms out there. We know the last couple of school shootings alone were, of legal purchase firearms. I'll admit I'm not familiar with the age restrictions limits. It's not something I personally gotten into in my life. But what community policing happens when do you guys get notified if someone who turns of age receives a gun? Is there, are you part of the background check? Are you part of the impersonal check or anything along those lines? So
I brought you up for a reason.
There you go.
You want to do the microphone thing? Okay. So, one of the biggest pluses living in Stoughton is the community at large. You know, still in police go above and beyond, and very thankful. And one of the biggest pluses living in Stoughton is the community at large. You know, still in police go above and beyond, and very thankful. And one of the biggest pluses living in Stoughton is the community at large. You know, still in police go above and beyond, and very thankful.
I like that shirt, by the way. Thanks.
Fire the coach. Brian Holmes, if anybody doesn't know me, Massachusetts is one of the most highly regulated states in the country, right on par with New York and at one point in time New Hampshire. There is an 11-step process to getting your license to carry. You have to be age 21 to get a license to carry. You have to be age 18 to get a firearms identification card. Firearms identification is for rifles and shotguns only, hunting and sports. We don't get notified about the registration of a firearm. We can access, if we needed to for a law enforcement purpose, a database that shows firearms ownership and transfer.
There was a question. I know there's a couple of them coming. Let me just, she was first and then I'll get to her.
I just wanted to kind of piggyback off of your comment. Dealing with things in an age-appropriate way, I completely agree. But also, and I'm sure everyone in this room would agree, that we have to be honest and transparent about the fact that our children know and have access to way more information than we would ever like them to. Our first grader knew about Uvalde. Well, she said she didn't, but as the questions, we asked one question at a time, and each question we asked, she prompted the next question with an answer that she already knew about what it was. So to add on to that, is there something that the parents can do in the community? I don't know if there's any sort of collaborative with the parents in the school or with the parents and the police, or if there's any interest in a collaborative just for dissemination of information to the rest of the community, since everybody can't be here when they would like to be.
Thank you. I think that's a great suggestion. Let me think about that. I think the most important thing is to see something, say something, just to help us all, stay alert. But great idea. No, thank you.
I guess my question is more for the chief. I know with the reports out of Uvalde, so I guess my concern is more the response as far as between the schools and the police department. So I know a lot of information gets passed back and forth. So I'm just kind of curious to if you guys discuss it, if that's something that's worked on between the schools and the police department in a situation, God forbid, that does happen in our community similar to that. Is there a plan in place, and are you able to speak to that at all?
As far as will we sort of debrief on the fires of Uvalde? So we did that when the Parkland happened. We did a great deal of the upper echelon of the school system, sort of talking and going through it all. And that, out of that shooting, sort of spurred a new active shooter response, which is called ASHER. And that ASHER, it's active shooter hostile environment response. And that sort of started with school systems, police departments, and fire departments collaboratively training together, where instead of the fire departments staying in the cold zone, where far away from the incident, they don protective vests and they will come into a warm zone, and they will start treating anybody that is a victim that is injured. So these incidents that happen will result in a great deal of training, not just in the schools, not just in the police department separately, but collaboratively. So the fire department and the police department over the last few years have done a number of drills together where we're setting up situations and events, and we're training how we would respond, both police officers and firefighters, in incidents of critical incidents. Does that answer your question, or is it?
No, I guess because my concern was, from what it seemed like, it was the report, it seemed like the response changed for the school based from it being an active shooter versus someone being in the school where it's a hostage situation, which kind of caused the delay. So I guess for myself, is as concerned as a parent, is that if the police receive a call of anyone being, on site with a gun, I think probably I'm a little bit more hesitant about people waiting to go in. Like in that situation like that, that's kind of like my question.
Yeah. So you've heard what they've done for training, right? And so that should inspire a little bit of confidence in you. But then you always have that question, well, like, well, I'm sure these other officers have been trained, what's gonna happen in a real situation? Well, I can kind of give you what happens in a real situation. We had a go to blue false alarm our first year in the building in 2019. We actually had a couple of them, but on one of the first false alarms, what happened at the high school is the go to blue alarm went off, which instantly alerted the Stoughton police, that we had some kind of danger. And of course, they don't know it's a false alarm, and we don't know it's a false alarm at the time. And the response to the high school was almost instantaneously. We had several cars pull up, but then what happened was instantly officers were in the building with weapons drawn, in formation, going into the building, instantly. There was no delay. So although we can talk about what the training has been and what in theory we'd like to think, in those instances when we didn't know what was really happening and we thought it might be real, they responded exactly as they've been trained. So.
And every classroom and every room was searched. We went through the entire building in that incident because we're trained not to, just, hey, Ms. Miller comes up to the door, hey, it's a false alarm. Like, we go the next step and we go through the building to make sure, as great as the Go Blue system is, it's technology, right? So sometimes technology is finicky. And so we want to know actually that whether there is or isn't something going on, we've gone to that extent. But we've all been trained here, and I can't speak to what happened down in Texas, but we've all been trained to stop the threat. And I think you're going to find there's a great deal of law enforcement, including ourselves, that they knew that there was still a threat and they should have gone. But it's easy to Monday morning quarterback up here in Massachusetts, but we are trained to stop the threat.
One of the biggest things that came out of Columbine was they waited way too long to go in and do something. Most of these incidents are over in a matter of 5 minutes. So if we wait to go in, I know I personally have gone through active shooter training for a single response. So if I am the only police officer in the middle school and there's something happening in my school, I have a duty and an obligation to stop that threat as quickly as possible while notifying other officers to come on scene. And that's a responsibility I take on in this position, and I've gone through the training for it.
And I think you'll see in some of the video where other officers didn't listen to what that school chief was doing, and they were breaking out windows and they were taking children out of the windows because they weren't following that order because it had been too long because of the training they had been through. So, but that is the training that we go through, and again, we collaborate and work in, I think, 3 drills now of ASHA training with the fire department. And they're coming into the warm zones, and they are surrounded by armed police officers and going into what is still potentially, if there was a threat on, and use this school as, on the other side of the school, away from the office, and on the opposite side of the lobby, then they could come in if there was anybody injured in this side of the school, and they know the evacuation routes, and they could come in from the side door by the kindergarten classrooms. If it was down on the back side here, they could safely get there, they would.
There's a government think tank called the Police Executive Research Forum. They are weighing in on all of this, and they have weighed in on everything. They've actually provided a response guideline that goes to agency heads and police chiefs across the country. One of their reports actually says you might be in, mitigating a threat for an active shooter, and then all of a sudden the situation dictates that it's a barricaded subject. So I guess the short response, to give you a little bit more insight, is that the situation dictates the actual response.
So I have a question. My child is a student at Wilton High School. A few months back, there was an incident where at drop-off, there was a suspicious person in the school. This was maybe about 4 or 5 months ago. What's the protocol in a situation like this? This was right at drop-off time, so we actually didn't hear about it until later on when I picked her up that evening. I did notice a lot of the police presence, but us parents did not get notified until later on that afternoon. So what's the protocol surrounding that? I don't know if you remember that incident.
I can speak to, sorry. I actually apologize, I don't recall the incident you're referring to, and I have a couple staff members here, and we're kind of shaking our heads.
There was one a few years ago. Was that okay, I might get my time frame. She's been there for 5 years. So
Yeah.
it may have with COVID and everything, but there was an incident one morning
Yes.
at drop-off where and it may have not been someone in the school,
Sure,
but
so
that was what they were
absolutely.
speculating.
So this was several years prior to the
Okay.
pandemic. It was prior to my time as principal, but I can tell you that if that were to happen in any of our schools, if ever there is a suspicion that someone's in the building that should not be, all of our staff has been empowered to call 911 and to let someone know at the police department that there's someone that they're suspicious of in or around the building. And then obviously, my role as principal would be to notify the parents as quickly as I was able to let you know that something had happened and that everything was okay, and give as much information as appropriate in that moment.
Okay.
Well, thank you all very much. I think this has been a very productive hour and an opportunity for all of us to ask questions and receive some answers. I do want to thank my administrative team. I want to thank the Stoughton Police Department for coming down this evening. And, let's continue the conversation. So thank you very, very much.